12 p.m. January 22nd, 2026. North Atlantic, 800 nautical miles southeast of Newfoundland. On the bridge of the Russian-flagged tanker Marinara, Captain Dmitry Volkov is smiling. On his sonar display, a $400 million Russian Kilo-class submarine circling 380 feet below. Moscow's black hole, his invisible guardian. He believes he's untouchable, but he's wrong. What Volkov doesn't see is that his guardian submarine fled 47 minutes ago, its sensors destroyed in a coordinated strike he never detected. What blinded a $400 million Russia's most advanced submarine? Something involving Ukrainian intelligence from 4,000 miles away, and American firepower that Moscow never saw coming. Now Volkov has exactly 120 seconds before the real predators arrive. U.S. Navy SEALs from the 161st soar descending through the clouds to seize his vessel. If you want to see how a $400 million invisible submarine was hunted down and neutered by sonobuoys cheaper than a laptop, how Ukraine and the U.S. just executed Russia's entire shadow fleet in one surgical operation, stay with us and hit subscribe now. Early January 2026, La Guaira, Venezuela. To understand what's happening right now in the North Atlantic, rewind 3 weeks. In the warm Caribbean waters off Venezuela, the tanker Bella 1 sat dangerously low, plimsoll lines submerged beneath 1.8 million barrels of sanctioned crude, the kind that comes with international arrest warrants. Captain Andreas Makris felt lucky. 41 million square miles of ocean. What were the odds of getting caught? The odds turn out 100%. 200 nautical miles away, the USCGC Monroe had already marked him as prey. Here's what Makris didn't understand about modern Coast Guard cutters. The Monroe isn't a ship, she's a floating surveillance fortress. Her AN/SPS-73 radar painted the Bella 1's hull from over the horizon like she was glowing under stadium lights. The Combat Information Center was simultaneously pulling satellite imagery, tracking AIS gaps, and monitoring Venezuelan port communications in real time. When the Bella 1's lookout spotted the Monroe's distinctive mast on January 7th, panic detonated on the bridge. Makris slammed the throttle to 15 knots, maximum speed for a loaded tanker. A turtle trying to outrun a satellite-equipped hawk. For 2 desperate weeks, the Bella 1 zigzagged across the Atlantic, weaving through commercial lanes, praying to disappear into the chaos of 50,000 daily transits. They didn't realize something critical. In 2026, algorithmic surveillance doesn't blink. Every speed variance, every AIS dropout, every fuel burn inconsistency gets logged and analyzed by systems that never sleep. And if you think a surface radar at 200 miles is impressive, wait until you see what the P-8A Poseidon does from 25,000 feet. We're talking technology that makes the Bella 1's evasion attempts look like a kid hiding under a glass table. January 8th, 2026. 25,000 feet over the Atlantic. While Captain Makris believed his zigzag pattern was brilliant evasion, a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon from Patrol Squadron 5P-26 circled overhead like a patient predator, dissecting every desperate maneuver in real time. This isn't your grandfather's patrol plane. It's a flying analytical engine, and it was turning the Bella 1's escape attempt into a textbook case of self-incrimination. The aircraft's AN/APS-154 sensor sweeps 200 nautical miles every 6 seconds. But here's the breakthrough. It doesn't just detect vessels, it profiles their guilt. The radar operators call it hunting for the 3 death signals, and Makris was lighting up all 3 like a Christmas tree. The evidence didn't just look bad, it was prosecutorial gold. The Bella 1 was sustaining 15 knots while claiming a ballast run, burning fuel like a getaway car fleeing a heist. That chaotic sawtooth course? It had incinerated $180,000 in diesel, money literally evaporating into the Atlantic just to look suspicious. And her AIS transponder going dark on January 6th wasn't equipment failure. It was premeditated digital invisibility, the maritime equivalent of ripping the GPS tracker off your ankle monitor. NATO didn't just notice. By January 10th, they'd distributed her digital autopsy across every Allied command center from Norfolk to Naples. Then desperation turned to recklessness. On January 18th, Makros's crew painted a Russian flag across the hull and radioed Moscow for protection. The logic was simple: force the Kremlin's hand, NATO backs down. Moscow took the bait, but not the way Makros hoped. Within 11 hours, Russian Northern Fleet Command dispatched an improved Kilo-class submarine. Pride wouldn't allow them to abandon a vessel flying their colors. They committed $400 million to protect $42 million in contraband. Within 11 minutes of transmission, American SIGINT had intercepted the entire order and forwarded it to Fort Meade. The Kilo's captain was still unsealing his orders when NATO already knew his destination. The hunters had become the hunted. January 19, 2026. This is where a tanker chase becomes naval warfare history. The USCGC Monroe wasn't operating alone anymore. Boeing P-8A Poseidon circled overhead. American and British crews rotating in seamless 8-hour shifts. The Royal Navy sent RFA Tide Force as a floating gas station, ensuring the coalition could maintain pressure indefinitely. The Maritime Avengers were assembling in the middle of a freezing ocean. But the real game changer wasn't American technology or British logistics. It was Ukraine. A landlocked country 4,000 miles from the Atlantic, with exactly 0 naval vessels, had just turned the North Atlantic into a lit aquarium. While the world watched Kyiv fight in Donbass trenches, Ukraine's SBU and Gyur were quietly revolutionizing submarine warfare from basement offices. For 2 years, they'd been feeding Black Sea drone footage into neural networks. Thousands of hours of Russian submarine behavior captured by $2,000 commercial drones you could buy on Amazon. The insight was elegant. Stop treating Russian subs as invisible ghosts, and start seeing them as pattern-bound organisms. Russian doctrine is rigid by design. Sprint and drift cycles run on predictable intervals. Thermal exhaust creates plumes at specific depths. Even the Kilo's legendary silence leaves negative space. Acoustic voids where marine life should be making noise. The Ukrainian AI didn't guess where the submarine was. It calculated position to the nautical mile, updating every 6 minutes through NATO's Link 16 data link, feeding coordinates directly into the Monroe's combat systems with surgical precision. Moscow dispatched what they believed was an invisible rescue mission. What they actually sent was a $400 million asset swimming toward a trap designed specifically for it, with every movement predicted, every tactic anticipated, every escape route already closed. The Kilo's commander had no idea his boat was already encircled. And who was Moscow sending into this digital spiderweb? Russia's prized improved Kilo-class submarine. 242 feet of cold-rolled steel that cost $400 million and represented the pinnacle of Soviet-era submarine design philosophy. On paper, this thing is a nightmare. It can dive nearly 1,000 feet into the abyss, sustain submerged operations for 45 days, and when running on battery power alone, produces less acoustic noise than a pod of dolphins. The hull is wrapped in specialized anechoic tiles, $240 per square foot of high-tech rubber compounds embedded with air cavities designed to swallow active sonar pings like acoustic foam in a recording studio. In the Kremlin, they call it the black hole because Western sonar operators genuinely struggle to detect it in open water. NATO spent billions developing towed arrays and variable depth sonar specifically to counter this class of submarine. At $400 million per vessel, Moscow was betting the farm that this invisible ghost would make the Americans blink and let the Marinara slip away. It's almost cute, isn't it? The Russians really believed they were the apex predators lurking in the depths, waiting for the perfect moment to force a diplomatic standoff. What they didn't realize, what their engineers couldn't have predicted back in the Cold War design bureaus, is that those anechoic tiles were optimized for sonar frequencies from 1987. Frequencies that modern NATO systems don't even use anymore. It's like wearing medieval chainmail to a drone war. Worse, its captain had no idea Ukrainian algorithms had already mapped his boat's behavioral signature with 96% confidence intervals. Every sprint and drift cycle, every thermal exhaust pattern, every evasive maneuver, pre-calculated and predicted. He thought he was setting an ambush. He was swimming into a dissection. Spoiler, that $400 million black hole is currently in dry dock with fried sonar arrays, a billion-ruble lesson in technological obsolescence. But that's jumping ahead. First, we need to watch how Moscow's masterpiece got surgically dismantled in 47 minutes. 1:21 p.m., January 22nd, 2026. 380 feet below the surface. At 1,000 feet above the Atlantic, the P-8A Poseidon began its bombardment. Not with weapons, but with sensors. Over the next 90 seconds, the aircraft's internal rotary launcher deployed 127 SSQ-53F DIFAR sonobuoys in a geometric pattern that looked like a spider web designed by a mathematician having a fever dream. Each sonobuoy is deceptively simple: a radio transmitter floating on the surface, tethered to a hydrophone suspended 1,500 feet below. Individually, they cost $1,200, the price of a decent laptop. Collectively, they're an acoustic cage covering 50 square miles of ocean. Do the math. 127 buoys at $1,200 equals $152,400 total. That grid just trapped a $400 million submarine, a cost ratio of 2,631 to 1. The sonobuoys hit the water with rhythmic precision, one every 1.4 seconds. Each splashdown added another node to the network, building a three-dimensional acoustic map in real time. Temperature gradients, salinity layers, ambient biologics, all factored into the computational model streaming back to the P-8A. Then came the shift from passive listening to active hunting. Selected buoys switched to transmit mode, broadcasting sonar pulses at frequencies specifically tuned to penetrate the kilo's anechoic coating. Russian engineers designed those tiles to absorb 1 to 10 kilohertz. The Alliance pinged at 12 kilohertz and 850 hertz simultaneously, exploiting the edges. The returns were unmistakable. A 242-foot metallic cylinder at 380 feet, bearing 187 degrees, speed 3 knots. The trap had closed. At 1:47 p.m., Commander Volkov tried to fight back. He ordered his electronic warfare suite to jam the Sonobuoy uplinks. For exactly 3 seconds, the Alliance's data feed flickered. Then the P-8A switched to frequency-hopping logic, 400 hops per second, bypassing Russian jamming like a master key sliding through a broken lock. At 1:49 p.m., the Poseidon released 2 Mk-54 lightweight torpedoes. These weren't the ship killers of Hollywood. Their warheads had been replaced with high-output acoustic transmitters. As they spiraled toward the Kilo at 800-meter standoff, they ignited a coordinated acoustic assault hitting 235 decibels. Inside the submarine, the world ended. Sonar operators ripped their headsets off as white noise overloaded every display. The Kilo's hull-mounted hydrophones, designed to detect faint biologics miles away, were being subjected to acoustic energy equivalent to standing inside a jet engine at full thrust. Protection circuits triggered automatically, shutting down entire sensor arrays to prevent permanent hardware damage. The submarine's eyes weren't destroyed. They were cauterized, surgically overwhelmed by an adversary that understood Russian electronics down to the circuit level. Volkov was navigating blind in 800 feet of black water with 2 torpedoes circling his hull. At 1:52 p.m., he ordered an emergency dive to 950 feet, 10 meters from crush depth, and fled south at maximum battery power. The $400 million black hole had become a panicked animal running for its life. 2:04 p.m. With the submarine fled, the Marinara sat alone, 200,000 tons of illegal oil floating in total isolation. That silence shattered fast. From the gray cloud deck, 3 MH-60M Seahawks and 2 MH-6M Little Birds from the 160 Thial SOAR materialized, flying nap of the Earth just 30 feet above the wave crests. Rotor wash created visible spray patterns across the ocean surface, flying at the absolute edge of physics in 40-knot winds and 10-foot swells. The lead Seahawks LRAD activated at 162 decibels, louder than a jet engine at point-blank range. The voice boomed in Russian and English. "Stop your engines! Prepare for boarding! This is your only warning!" Captain Volkov, stubborn and under orders from Moscow, kept the throttle at maximum. He thought international waters meant safety. However, that was a very expensive mistake. The MH-6 Little Bird tilted forward and opened fire. Red tracers arced across the Marinara's bow, skipping off the water and creating geysers of white foam that looked like liquid glass exploding. The .50 caliber rounds weren't aimed to kill, they were drawing a line. At 2:07 p.m., Volkov finally cut the engines. The 10,000 horsepower diesel groaned and fell silent. The helicopters circled like predators. 11:47 p.m., January 22, 2026. Let's talk about the math of this operation. The mission that neutralized a $400 million submarine and seized $42 million in cargo? It cost $1.14 million to pull off. Here's how that breaks down. Those 127 sonobuoys that built the acoustic cage ran about $152,400. The P-8A burned roughly $420,000 in flight hours circling overhead. The two Mk-54 torpedoes that acoustically blinded the Kilo cost $560,000 combined. And the Ukrainian AI doing the heavy analytical lifting? It ran on computing power you could buy at Best Buy. Marginal cost essentially zero. That's a 37-to-1 return on investment. The kind of ratio that makes even Wall Street's most aggressive traders look like they're being conservative. But here's what really matters. Russia bet everything on steel and secrecy, building submarines engineered to vanish into the black. The alliance bet on software and transparency, building networks that turn entire oceans into lit aquariums where nothing stays hidden. Moscow now faces an unsolvable equation: withdraw submarines to guard home waters, or continue escorting smugglers and suffer more public humiliations. So here's the question. If you were the Kilo's commander at 1:47 p.m., staring at sonar displays showing torpedo positions, what would you have done? Fight against torpedoes you couldn't hear coming? Surface and surrender? Flee and abandon the ship you were sent to protect? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If your analysis goes deeper than the obvious, I'll pin it. And if you want more stories about how modern warfare is quietly rewriting the rules, make sure you're subscribed. We'll see you next time.